This video is sponsored by Audible. Discussing Harry Potter has become something totally fraught due to the transphobia of the series creator Joanne Kathleen Rowling. Rightfully so, she sucked and she ruined it for everyone. So thanks, glad Fantastic Beasts is canceled finally. Good news for everyone. I have almost entirely given up Harry Potter, sticking mainly to just enjoying fan-made products that do not put money in Rowling's pocket. And also feed my problematic shipper needs. Every member of the Golden Trio has in real life stood up to support the trans community, which makes me feel happy to have at one time wanted to make out with every single one of them. So good for me. Glad that we can have a small victory in the bisexual community. As a result of just me not wanting to talk about Harry Potter, there are a few Harry Potter related topics I scrapped last year because I just didn't want to give even the slightest bit of praise to the books or the creator. And in the time since then, I have felt very validated in that opinion because J.K. Rowling is the worst, and her tweeting about crying into her royalties only reinforced the very fact that there is no way to separate Harry Potter from her. At least not licensed products. Fan art, fan items, maybe so, there's a better argument for that, but not licensed. As a result, when I was reading some fan fiction on AO3, due to the nature of my problematic ship, I kept seeing a certain name. Blaise Zabini.
Amused, Blaise.
And then, against my will, I got that familiar urge. The urge to make a content. Race in the Harry Potter books has always been an issue. The novels have antagonists, the Death Eaters, who believe in blood purity and are thinly veiled Ku Klux Klan and Nazi avatars. It is very much on the tin, and to a degree that works. Yet when you apply any race theory or language about marginalization onto the books in a meaningful way, you find a lot of these avatars and metaphors and things fall apart. Because fundamentally, Joanne does not really understand the nuances and complexities of discrimination on a structural level, which doesn't surprise anyone anymore, but in the early aughts, controversial opinion. Because Harry Potter, that was the liberal series. That was the one that was going to keep you from voting for Trump. And to be fair, the series does start off as a book series for middle grade children. So again, you have that simplicity. The only character that was made morally complicated was Snape because he saves Harry despite being seen as an antagonistic figure. But fundamentally, in the first 3 novels, it broke down to Gryffindor good, Slytherin bad. And not just for class reasons, but also because of the whole blood purity TM. We see this in Chamber of Secrets, where Draco Malfoy calls Hermione Granger a mudblood.
It means dirty blood. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who is muggle-born, someone with non-magic parents, someone like me.
The worst slur. We're gonna call it the M word moving forward because we don't want to trigger anybody. Sorry, that sounds like a right-wing kind of sentence. It's just more like the mudblood thing irritates me when I think about it too much, because don't tell me Hermione could have been black. We also get the introduction in Chambers of Secrets to the house-elves and Dobby, a clumsy, ignorant white savior metaphor, but for a children's book series where most of the characters are white and posh, sure, whatever. All this to say is that Slytherin is established early on as being equivalent to racist in our world. Draco Malfoy being the very blonde, very pale, very blue blood figurehead of this, serving, undiluted Aryan realness. But it's okay, because I was gonna fix him. The very few characters of color we do see in the series are overwhelmingly in other houses, playing into this establishment of Slytherin as the racist house. That is until Blaise Zabini became black.
For white people, it was just another great week. They never saw it coming.
This video is sponsored by Audible. Due to my work and everything that I've been doing, I do not have all the time to read that I would like, but I have been using Audible as my go-to way to get through and get a taste of all of the great books that I've been wanting to check out, but not having time to put eyeballs to page. Now that the crown is back, I am back on my royals bullshit, and I have been listening to Tina Brown's The Palace Papers. I am on chapter 18, which is all about Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, and Tina Brown herself is narrating it, and she has like the kind of posh lip to her voice that you really just feel like this woman knows how to sell this topic.
Nadia Martinkova as his Yugoslavian sex slave.
Audible is a great resource for music, podcasts, everything. There's a great Fiasco podcast all about the AIDS crisis that came out earlier this year that has been so instructive to me, especially dealing with the pandemic that we're in right now. And before I go to bed, just to get me out of just looking at the screen so I can actually fall asleep, I will put on the first chapter. I'll put on a chapter of an audiobook. And what I love is that you can set it up so that it stops at a certain chapter. So at least you know that if you fall asleep while listening to David Attenborough, you can go back and re-listen to what you missed. So if you have been wanting a way to consume all of the books that you haven't been able to actually look at, try Audible. Let Audible help you discover all the new ways to travel to new worlds, listen to royals gossip, and also just sometimes, try something out. And I find that when I revisit a book as an audiobook, I find myself catching different things than I would have when I was just on the page. So it is a great way to re-listen to a book and rediscover something that you already have, in addition to finding something new. New members can try Audible for 30 days free using my code. So visit audible.com/princessweeks or text Princess Weeks to 500-500. Again, text Princess Weeks to 500-500 or go to audible.com/Princess Weeks to try out something new. And if you would like some more recommendations about what I've been listening to on Audible, here are my top 5 most recent completed Audible hits. Listening to Luckiest Girl Alive. That book is very intense, and it has a very intentionally difficult protagonist, and there are some bits where I was like, oh god. But it was definitely a really great experience to listen to, and I definitely got a totally different vibe of Ani/Tiffany as a protagonist by listening to it than I think I would have gotten if I read it through listening to her on Audible. So if you would try to check it out and you've seen the movie and you kind of wanted to get a little bit more, I'd recommend listening to the audiobook. It is very, very engaging and also frustrating. First mentioned in Harry Potter and the Regent Locked Stone, Blaise Zabini is the last character to be sorted and is sorted into Slytherin. This character was not described at all at this point, so in true fandoming, the fandom decided to just make them whatever they saw fit. And as someone who has been shipping problematically for some time, I have been somewhat privy to watching this evolution of how people have seen Blaise from being a character that had no definition to finally being canonized as a black man in the Half-Blood Prince. When it came to gender, Blaise was seen as a gender neutral name. So for a certain period in fandom, Blaise was a she. Especially because in 2 translations, the character was described as female. Sometimes she dated Draco Malfoy, a role that was also usually given to Pansy Parkinson, who J.K. Rowling was like, she's the worst person. She's inspired by every woman I've ever hated. It's like, show enough. At other times, she was the confidant, best friend, consigliere type. And eventually people did decide that Blaise was a guy and therefore became the hot Italian swarthy biffle to Draco. And him being Italian was something that I remember being brought up a lot in fic. And actually a really fun thing is that now there is a segment of people that have Blaise as trans, which I love. But again, everything changed in 2005 when it was revealed that Blaise Zabini was black. To a certain degree, you can understand the confusion about this from people because when J.K. Rowling wanted you to know the character wasn't white, she would let you know with her trademark ethnic names, Cho Chang, the Patel twins, or very blatant descriptions of said black characters like Kinsley Shackbolt, a tall black man who was bald-headed with a single gold loop earring, the ethnic marker of a black man. Dean Thomas, whose physical description was only described in the American editions of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And we'll get more into Dean in a second. Lee Jordan, a boy with dreadlocks, and Angelina Johnson, black girl with braids. And in fact, one of the actual racist things we see in the book is Pansy saying to Angela, "Hey Johnson, what's up with that hairstyle anyway? Why would anyone want to look like they've got worms coming out of their head?" So we can beat Pansy's ass. So after all this time, Joanne finally gives us a canonical black Slytherin. The only thing we know about him is that his mother is some sort of black widow, well, black widow who kills her husband for money. And Blaise's one character trait is being arrogant and thinking he's too pretty for everyone. The actor who plays Blaise got an expanded role in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 because Blaise is present in the fight during the Room of Requirement scene, replacing Crabbe because the actor was dropped because he was convicted of possessing cannabis. Like, Blaise takes Goyle's place in the film, and Goyle takes Crabbe's place and is killed by the friend fire because, you know, someone Slytherin of like the Silver Trio had to die, and then we're gonna kill the black guy. It was interesting when I was doing research for this video, I found out that Dean was meant to be a much bigger part of the Harry Potter universe. Originally, Dean was gonna join Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville to confront Draco Malfoy, but he was cut out of the scene entirely. And essentially it came down to Joanne had the choice to either develop Neville or Dean, and she chose Neville. And now I love Neville, you know, hashtag that's my chosen one, but I think about how cool it would have been to have Harry's in-house foil be a black British boy, but we did not have that. And so most of the black representation in Harry Potter is very much in the background. When Blaise was codified as black, there came some backlash, mainly because there was an idea that Blaise didn't fit. There were some great articles written by my friend Stitch all about this if you want to go into depth, but as someone who was there, it's really hard to describe how, despite having zero actual lines, no description or personality, this character became a main part of Slytherin headcanon and fandom, which is why it's so jarring that that character is not there as much anymore. Like, he was like the ultimate third. Like, you never had much development for Crabbe or Goyle. It would usually be Draco was never hanging out with those two. It was him, Pansy, and Blaise. That was it. And then eventually Theodore Nott. But now, as I've been reading a lot more fan fiction, Blaise is still kind of there, but his race and his skin tone is never brought into it. Theodore Nott is really in there, a character who only became relevant in The Cursed Child, although like Dean, he's apparently a pet character that Rowling ended up cutting a lot of information from. In fanfiction world, he has basically become now the ultimate part of the silver trio of Slytherin. And again, it is weird to see how fandom will build up these characters to take them right down, because the thing about it is, like, when you read, for example, I went back and I was doing some research. I went to the historical documents, fanfiction.net, because we can't go to AO3 because Blaise became black before AO3 was created. So they get grandfathered in. They knew he was a Negro when they met him. But at fanfiction.net, which you'll read about, you'll hear about like Italian boy and this boy and all these kind of things and his olive skin. And now Blaise's skin is almost never really brought up in the fanfic that I have read, and I went through a couple, although I do only read smut, so maybe that was the thing. Maybe the smut doesn't care. But yet in those same modern smut Draco and Blaise stuff, you'll hear a lot of stuff about Draco's pale skin, blue veiny skin, and I'm just like, okay, so glad you're not fetishizing Blaise's skin, but his racial codifiers have all but disappeared. Any ethnic markers, it's like he's a good looking black boy, and that's all that matters. Maybe Avila, jury's still out on that because he's so fine, but it's definitely not as much of a role as he used to have. And there used to be a online message fan club for Blaise and how mysterious he was. Again, an entire fan club about a character that had 0 lines and 0 impact in the narrative until like book 6. And then again, was just there to be like, look, Black Slytherins exist, they could be shady too. And of course there are people who are disappointed because now Blaise could no longer fit into their image and their canon because you can't be a Black Italian. I really have to blame Giancarlo Esposito for this because he's been playing Latino for so long. People don't know that he's sexy, Black, and Italian. And I really need him to gather back his own heritage and stop playing Latinos and play Italians again. He needs to voice Mario. And again, what you will see when you go back into these old message forums are people saying like, no, we're not racist. We just aren't attracted to Black people. As one user said, a Black Blaise Zabini does not fit. Blaise Zabini is a name that indicates Italian descent. Zabini is an Italian surname, and Blaise is the name of a Christian saint whose cult is pretty much restricted to Italy and France. My grandmother's last name was Douglas. My last name is Weeks. My mother's last name is Cook. Those are not what we would call African names. Those are the names of our colonial ancestors, our white colonial ancestors that put those names onto us, probably because they either owned us or later on when they were allowed to marry us in the Caribbean, they fucked us and we got their names. So we have Black Italians, Black French, and the French, those colonizing motherfuckers. Okay, let's not be silly here. Fandom is silly, doesn't know how race works, how colonization works, and so haters are gonna hate. For most fans of Harry Potter, this probably may not have been a big deal to them. They may not even remember this. It might have been a blip because, of course, the idea of fandom being mad about a character being codified as Black is ridiculous, although it has happened multiple times. But for me and for many others in the Black community, I do remember this being a time where I fundamentally realized that I was reading different books than my white peers, and especially in the way that I saw Slytherin, which is my house, back when that was my personality and I allowed it to be. Because including a Black wizard in the Slytherin house fundamentally changed the racial allegory of the text. Nazis and KK members hate Black people, and now that we have established that Aryan Prince Draco Malfoy is friends with a Black person, and that pureblood wizard identity extends to non-white people, that complicates things. And even if the fandom may not think this is true, for those of us who do this kind of pop culture reading as a deeper way of connecting to the text, it does matter to us. And I'm going to say this right about before I get into this part of the conversation, because it's a part of the conversation that can get a little divisive. So I'm going to put this little disclaimer right now. If you do not want to engage with the text this deeply, if you do not care about this part of it, if you are like, I don't want to think about race in Harry Potter, goodbye. You don't have to. I do. I think about it because I think race and racism is integral to the text of the book, and how it fails at it in the series is important. And to me, it connects to how Rowling has acted today. It represents why she doesn't understand structural inequality and how she can think of her transphobic ideology as protecting women when no, she is uplifting prejudice and structural inequality. And if you don't understand structural inequality, how can you represent it in your books? And to me, that is a key conversation. And most importantly, on top of it, what does it mean when those of us who wanted to have that conversation in good faith, in community with other fans, were told not to think about it too much because the books were liberal and we should have just accepted that she never meant any harm? And now we're here. So yeah, if you don't want to engage with that, and again, if you want to have a civilized discourse about it in the comments, sure thing. But if you're trying to guilt me or goad me, please, I'm drinking tequila. Leave me alone.
There's some wizards, like the Malfoy family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pure blood.
So there are some things I feel need to be established when we're talking about race and ethnicity in Harry Potter. 1, the books are not as inclusive as they should be for a book series that takes place in a UK magic school, especially one that serves the entire United Kingdom. What are Asians at? Number 2, J.K. Rowling's attempts to retroactively make the books more inclusive after the fact does not help her, the story, or any of her arguments. 3, we should not read Blood Purity in the Harry Potter context as inherently the same as racism in our modern world. This is the one that I know people are like, what? We're gonna get into it. 4, if you want to build a narrative about fighting prejudice, maybe understand how prejudice works and don't make all the major players in that story white. None of the characters of color in this series have any real deeper semblance of their cultural identity besides their names, and sometimes their hair being used or mentioned as a way of codifying their race. And even then, it's the same 3 hairstyles. Also, this is supposed to be taking place in like the 90s. Where is the pink lotion? Where's the pressing curls? While the United Kingdom is not as diverse because of population reasons as the United States, it still has a substantial Asian and Black British population. So for there to only be 8 book canon non-white characters out of a cast of hundreds is truly unimpressive. Like really, really bad. And a lot of them were added on, you know, the whole Lavender Brown controversy. If they were brave, they would have made Lavender Brown the whole time. But you know what? She does die. So, and she would be in competition with Hermione over a white man. We didn't need to see that. But as a result of this lack of actual diversity, the half-blood and muggle-born characters that get most of the wizard racism comments end up being white characters like Hermione. It also creates a huge backlash when characters like Blaise Zabini appear, who is both pureblood and Slytherin, because these binaries about the wizarding world are based on our issues in our real world, which are never actually dealt with in the text, because the story doesn't actually focus on them. When the Cursed Child was announced and a Black actress was cast as Hermione, J.K. Rowling came out and said that Hermione could have been anyone of any race, which is a lie. That's a dead ass lie. We see the book covers. We know that's a white woman, okay? Don't get me wrong. When there's fan art of Black Hermione or fanfic of Black Hermione, I love it. Take it, reclaim it, own it. I wish she was a redhead so we could still steal her twice. But in canon, Hermione is not written to be a person of color. Because if she were, then suddenly we'd have to have a real discussion about actual racism and not just made up allegories regarding goblins and elves. If we have in this society Black muggle-born wizards and witches, you know what they've heard their lives? They've heard their families being called, because here's the thing too, according to the timeline of Harry Potter, the majority of the Black characters that we have probably seen are, because of their names, we can assume they would be of some sort of Caribbean ancestry. So they would have been part of the Windrush generation. Their parents would have been, because this I think the series takes place, the timeline is from 1991 to 1998. And then the post-war years are us, right? So the Marauder generation, which is the generation of the parents, is going to be the same generation that was dealing with the aftermath of the Windrush generation. So we're talking about like first, maybe second generation Black Caribbean people who have actively dealt with Muggle racism. So I can assure you that if they're Black ass, if Dean Thomas is here in Muggle, you're like, what? We throwing hands. But there is such a lack of discussion about that, because if you're a Black person who grew up in the Muggle world, you go in the magical world and you find out there's slavery, so we're not gonna do nothing about this. And again, the text doesn't want you to think too much about this, but yet it keeps raising these questions and these discussions by presenting it in the text so loudly. Because if Hermione Granger were a non-white child from a non-magical family thrust into a world where she had to deal with a whole new world of prejudice, that would show up differently in how the character was constructed. these things would matter. Because in the book, she don't care about becoming mudblood. Excuse me. She don't care about being called the M word. She can just brush that off because she's white. Even if she didn't know what it was. If I was a person, if I didn't know what the term mudblood meant, and I didn't really know what it was when I first read the book, but I knew it wasn't good, I'd have been like, what did you say? Like, it would have been another slur that would have impacted her life, having grown up in a minority space already, and then transferred to another one. That would be an entire arc. There is no way that a woman of color would have come up with spew in the way that she implemented it, and had her friends disrespect her that way, and she didn't beat the shit out of them. It would have been Hermione, Dean, Lee, Angela. All the Negroes of Hollywood have been like, we done. Racism in the real world would suddenly need to be addressed, if only to make clear the juxtaposition between the Muggle and magical communities. You never have to deal with this. They can just brush it off and not care, especially because Hermione is like, what, middle class, because her parents are both dentists. You can have these allusions and allegories because you're not creating any character that's going to complicate anything. Whenever we get into this is a metaphor for slavery, racism territory, it's always important to point out that when marginalized people actually exist in the story, we shouldn't need metaphors for it, especially if they take place within the exact same world, even if they're just like built differently on top of each other. Slavery existed in the Harry Potter world, both in the past with Black people and with the house-elves. Racism against non-white people exists in the Harry Potter world. Maybe not among wizards, but it does among muggles. When my friend made me watch the first Fantastic Beasts film with her, one of the things that sprung out to me immediately was that in the American wizarding world, it's hella segregated when it comes to wizards and no mages. Hate that term. It sounds, something about it just sounds very, don't like it. And that there's a Black female president of the Magical Congress in Serafina Pickery. But the movie takes place in 1926, which means Jim Crow is still a thing. And according to the wiki, that character, Madam President, was from Savannah, Georgia. So is there like a Black wizard version of the NAACP? Do non-white wizards just allow their no-mage counterparts to just be like oppressed and lynched instead? Like, what's going on? How many wizard schools we got? We got only one? Hold on, let me just check this. So yeah, it's the Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which is in Massachusetts. It accepts students from all over North America. See, there's your first mistake there. There is absolutely no way that there would be a wizarding school that was founded in 1627, great, that just was letting anybody in. So it's founded by a non-magical person. That's cute, I guess. So in addition to like not having anything really to understand about like indigenous peoples and all that shit, you just think that we're gonna have one magical school in Massachusetts? There would at least be two schools. There would be a southern school, there would be a northern school, and then of course, you know, we weren't a whole country for like a big chunk of that time, so eventually you had to have a western school. This doesn't make no sense. If you know anything about American history, there is no way that there would just be one school in the north, in Massachusetts. No, that's not happening here. And then you have the Goldstein sisters, clearly coded Jewish. What happened during World War II? Oh, you know, Grindelwald, a gay man, had a vision about the Holocaust and the atom bomb and was like, we should stop this. And J.K. Rowling was like, no, he's the bad guy, Chung-Li. And again, I know why he's the bad guy. I understand why he's the bad guy. But you can't just put him in a situation where he's like, let's stop the Holocaust. And then just leave it there. And then be like, well, he's got other plans too. I was like, I hear you. But let's go back to this Kill Hitler's discussion. Because I want to hear what he has to say. Let the man speak. And then we see that there's a female president. So like women in America literally just gained the right to vote like 6 years ago. Were witches involved in suffrage? And again, these questions come up not because I'm thinking too hard. They are natural questions to ask yourself the more you expand this universe. As soon as you expand it, these questions get asked and it turns it into a mess, because if magical people can inherently be born from non-magical people, then that means that a random oppressed person could have just been into existence, and born with magic. And knowing the history of humanity, that would likely not end up well for everybody. And even if they weren't trained to become a witch or wizard, we know from the story of Ariana Dumbledore that magical kids that can't control their magic, it can lead to violence and them being killed by humans. Or in Fantastic Beasts, where you have the character of Credus that can become an obscural and do immense damage and be very abused. Those are things that the story brings up and sets up, but are never fully explained. But okay, let's say that the goblins and house-elves are supposed to be our POC oppression avatars. Then why don't we ever see more of them in an active role? That game that I'm never gonna buy, apparently one of the side stories is about a goblin rebellion. And I'm like, well, the goblins have a right to be mad, my good sis. Most of the creatures who are part of the magical world get joked about that are not human, like Hagrid. And our house elf representation is made up of Dobby, Winky, and Creature. Dobby, who I hate causes problems for Harry and gets freed because he helps Harry in the most incompetent way and then dies saving his friends. Pick me bullshit. Winky, who is scapegoated by her owner and becomes an alcoholic because she can't handle freedom and is so depressed about it, but somehow inspires Hermione to become an ultimate white savior. And then there's Creature, who gets revenge on his abusive master by setting him up to die. You know what? We gonna claim Creature. We gonna take it. You can just say he's problematic. He keeps saying the M word, but he has potential. Not to mention that Muggle-born and half-blood wizards also participate in the oppression of magical creatures. So, and the reason why I think this matters, despite even my whole, I like to talk about pop culture in this way, and it brings me, this is actually quite fun for me. The reason why I think it matters is because during the 2016 election, I remember reading a bunch of articles about a study that claimed that Harry Potter readers were less likely to vote for Donald Trump because the story was so much about goodness and tolerance. And how could they support Trump? And I remember letting out a very loud cackle reading that, because clearly the study missed out on all the people who claimed that there was no way Blaise Zabini could be black because he couldn't fit. He wasn't hot enough to be in Slytherin. Or the people who came for Angelina Johnson for marrying George after Fred died and then constantly whitewashed their children. Or like the racists that have fits every time people make POC Harry fan art. It just gave people way too much credit. And J.K. Rowling so much credit for saying basically discrimination is bad. We won't do anything about it, but we will kill one bad guy. Everything will be okay. The one thing she did get right, I do think, is that for a long time fandom was like, Draco is being abused. It's like, no, Draco comes from a very loving family. He's just a piece of shit that I love and I will fix, but only because of fandom Draco. Real Draco is not the wave. And now we need to get into the thing that I hate talking about because it's so weedsy and dumb, but it's part of why I feel the way I feel. Let's talk about the context in which blood purity exists in the world of Harry Potter.
Hello there.
Okay, so first of all, yes, I realize that green lipstick is very hard to pull off without making you look like a clown, and the fact that my face is huge doesn't help, but it's still better than my makeup in this video. I don't like the way I look in this video, so if anyone has a comment about it, don't worry, I'm already thinking it. I did not really think I well explained my point here, so I wanted to redo it properly because I'm editing the video, so why not? So let's roll back. So according to text from secondary sources, aka the Harry Potter Wikipedia, wizards were actively hunted by Muggles, which forced the wizards to pass the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. This was first signed in 1689, and then it officially became law in 1692. Nearly Headless Nick is someone who was executed for being a wizard. It is said in Dumbledore's notes for the wizard and the hopping pot that wizards could often escape execution because they would use their wands, obviously, but in Nick's case, he did not have his wand. He was separated from it, so he was defenseless to being murdered. And then you have the issue of obscurals, which Newt Scamander explains what obscurals are here.
Before wizards went underground, when we were still being hunted by muggles, young wizards and witches sometimes tried to suppress their magic to avoid persecution. So instead of learning to harness or to control their powers, they developed what was called an obscurus.
It's an unstable, uncontrollable dark force that busts out and attacks.
In Harry Potter proper, Ariana Dumbledore was violently attacked by Muggle boys, and it left her traumatized and unable to practice magic, and she became an obscural. All this is interesting context for discussing the construction of blood purity and race purity in Hogwarts and in the wizarding world, because it is based in this fundamental thing that wizards and witches are kind of a minority group. It's not really well discussed, not discussed at all really, because we spend most of the story with witches and wizards. We see them as powerful figures, so we don't think of them as being minorities or oppressed or living in secret, but essentially that is what they are doing. They are intentionally leading secret lives because on a certain level they fear a full-out war with muggles because they could be killed off, I guess. Then you have Hogwarts, which was founded in 990 AD. And we all know the whole spiel. Slytherin only wanted purebloods in, and that was the whole thing. I want to really highlight Quinn Curio's video about Rowling, why does Slytherin still exist? Because I think fundamentally, J.K. Rowling did not mean for Slytherin to be irredeemable and evil, even though she absolutely wrote them that way. But I think she has their reality and their concepts based on survival. I mean, self-preservation is one of the key things of being in Slytherin. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, it's less about self-preserving your pure blood or your blood purity, but preserving yourselves as witches and wizards, as people who were being slaughtered. And to me, one of the things that's really key in understanding this is that we have seen wizards be traumatized by muggles. We know muggles are terrible as said muggles. And even if we look at in real life, you know, between the years of 1500 and 1660 up to like 800,000 suspected witches were put to death in Europe. Like, if we even take a slither of that, of being what bases the reality for the witches community in Europe, which since this thing was signed in the 1600s, we can assume these witch trials definitely influenced something. It does create an argument of, well, why are we going to allow the children of people that might potentially want to kill us into the school? And I think one of the things that isn't in the text, and let me be clear, it's not in the text, is that Slytherin is defined by the other three houses in a lot of ways. It is written by the victors. We really don't have Slytherin himself, the figure, talking about his ideology. We simply get it as the backwash of the fantastical racism of the era. So, but just putting into perspective that he was coming about in a time where witches were going to be stigmatized, you know, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live era. You know, this is before the Hammer of Witches, but at the same time, the stoning, the persecution of witches or perceived witches has always been a thing and is not unique to any one place. Therefore, wouldn't it make sense to want to be like, wait, why are we just letting anybody into the school? Racism, discrimination doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It happens because of history, socialization, the traumas of the era. Like, a lot of anti-Semitism is rooted in sort of the backlash to during things like the Black Plague, or through, you know, certain financial crises, the Jewish community as their own community being seen as separate from that, and therefore people creating an entire mentality around them, an idea of them, in order to vilify them for being successful or not facing the same sort of issues as the rest of the population were doing. These things don't just exist because it's fun, Modern day racism, as we know, like modern day anti-blackness, is not what it has always been historically. We didn't have the same concept of race that we have now that we had centuries ago. So that matters. And so when we're talking about fantastical racism in Harry Potter, it is important to ask, well, why does blood purity exist? Why is there a separation between muggles and wizards? Where did that come from? And how does that impact you today? If you are a pureblood Slytherin and you're being told stories about how muggles used to hunt and kill witches, then yeah, you're gonna have a different perspective towards half blood wizards and etc. And I think that's a problem when you have lazy, fantastical racism world building. You're not actually thinking about structural inequality. You're not thinking about how that impacts communities, especially a marginalized community that you are writing about, even a fictionalized one. And I think those are the things that make Harry Potter interesting as a thing to dissect. The downside is that the text itself is not necessarily always encouraging you to engage in it. And you will hit certain walls because, quite honestly, Rowling doesn't understand these nuances. And that's why she's trans exclusionary. That's why she can say like, oh, I'm not fat phobic, even though I make all of these larger, heavier set people and describe them in villainous, gross ways. I'm not fat phobic. I'm not ableist. I'm not any of these things because I don't do it with hate. And that's the trick, is that racism is not just about hate. It's not about, just like the same way transphobia isn't about being afraid of people. It is about what you do in society to keep people down, how you keep them in the shadows and keep them oppressed. And if we look at Hogwarts and the wizarding community in Harry Potter, collectively, we do not see blood purity in the way of the Malfoys being in the mainstream. Hermione is never actively treated differently by the institutions that she's a part of because she's Muggle born. She is a symbolic, perfect, brightest witch of her age, and that makes her the best. It makes her exceptional, and that is a factor in her experiences. But very rarely is she actually dealing with the day-to-day reality of like, wow, I woke up today, Muggle born again, the system is set up against me. It's just not. And if anything, she is framed as too brilliant for any of it to stop her. And we don't have any other perspectives because Ron is pure blood, he's just poor, so therefore classed out of it. And Harry is kind of in a politically neutral state. So in a lot of ways, the blood purity in Harry Potter is really just relying on us to see it as an equivalency to our racial discrimination, when it's not. It's totally different. It's totally different when you break down the parts. It has the same verbiage, and that is what she's hoping that you'll realize and focus on, that if the language sounds close enough, you won't wonder how it was developed. Anyway, I know that people might disagree with me about that, and that's totally fine. I think it's an interesting thing worth discussing. I didn't feel like I said it as well as I could in the previous way that I recorded it, so hopefully this will clarify things. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, let's get to the conclusion. And I hope I didn't hold this mic too close or too far while I filmed this segment. And so part of the reason why I find all of this interesting and why it connects to Blaise specifically is because I don't think she thought about it. Like, you made this house so racist, made them so stereotypically racist, old money, white. You just put this little black boy in there and you just drop him. You just drop him in there. And you don't think how that shifts the dynamics of your world. I don't think we have another, until Lita Lestrange in Fantastic Beastmas, that we get another Black Slytherin character. We have Black purebloods in that series that we see be oppressed by white purebloods. That's interesting. That's compelling. The story is shit. But that's interesting. That's worth discussing. But that's just thrown to the side. The series never asked the hard questions. A lot about what's been frustrating about people finally criticizing Rowling's fat phobia, anti-Jewishness, and tokenism in the wake of her transphobia is that people have been for a long time discussing these issues. And don't misrepresent me. This is not an oppression Olympics thing. All of these things should be discussed. Absolutely. But due to Rowling being able to pass as a progressive white darling, made those of us who were discussing these issues in good faith Debbie Downers without being considered agitators is part of the problem. It's why we get to these places where we're like, why are all fandoms so toxic? The assumption that addressing something flawed within a work means throwing out the whole thing is a problem with the way fandom operates. Blaise Zabini may have been a bit character in Harry Potter, but by just being Black, he unearthed something that the series and the fandom never wanted to deal with. How race works in this world, what it means to be Black in this space. And because we never wanted to deal with it then, what it meant to be marginalized in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, now we have no choice but to deal with all the fuckery all at once. And now that fear of throwing the baby out with the bathwater is actually happening. And while I don't think any discourse would have changed Rowling's opinion at the time, I do wonder what things would have been like if we had been allowed to in the first place.